Have you ever wondered why certain experiences from your childhood still haunt you? Why patterns of fear, anxiety, or emotional reactivity emerge even when you are surrounded by safety? And why it sometimes feels like your brain is working against you, sabotaging your happiness, relationships, and even your own sense of self? In the first 15 seconds, it is crucial to understand a shocking truth. Childhood trauma is not something that stays in the past. It rewires your brain, shaping how you perceive the world, process emotions, and even make decisions decades later. Your adult brain carries the echoes of unresolved stress, fear, and neglect, often in ways you cannot consciously detect, influencing your habits, attachments, and reactions without asking for permission. Trauma in early life doesn't just leave memories. It leaves neurological fingerprints, altering brain structures, connectivity, and the chemical balance that governs thought and emotion, quietly shaping the person you have become. Even small, seemingly insignificant events, emotional neglect, criticism, unpredictability, or fear, can have profound, lasting impacts on neural pathways that affect your ability to regulate emotions, respond to stress, and engage in healthy relationships. The first and most striking impact of childhood trauma is on the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, which becomes hyper-responsive in individuals who have experienced prolonged stress or fear in early life. When a child experiences repeated threats, whether physical, emotional, or relational, the amygdala learns to stay on high alert, detecting danger even in neutral or safe situations. This heightened vigilance does not disappear in adulthood. Instead, it becomes a baseline state, making ordinary stresses feel overwhelming and triggering intense emotional reactions disproportionate to the actual situation. Your brain is essentially operating as if it is still in a dangerous environment, preparing to fight, flee, or freeze at a moment's notice. Over time, this constant activation can affect your nervous system, causing anxiety, hypervigilance, or panic responses that feel automatic, unavoidable, and inexplicable. You may feel a tension in your body, racing thoughts, or intrusive fears, and yet not realize that these are echoes of a brain trained to survive danger that no longer exists. Equally important is the way childhood trauma affects the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for executive function, decision-making, and emotional regulation. When a child grows up in an environment of unpredictability or emotional instability, the prefrontal cortex often develops under chronic stress conditions, which can reduce its capacity to regulate impulses and manage emotional responses effectively. This means that as an adult, you may find it difficult to manage anger, tolerate frustration, or resist impulsive behaviors, not because you are inherently flawed, but because your brain was shaped in a way that prioritized survival over thoughtful decision-making. Traumatized brains often prioritize immediate emotional responses over long-term reasoning, which can explain why adults with childhood trauma sometimes feel trapped in patterns of overreaction, poor impulse control, or difficulty planning and organizing. These neural adaptations are clever survival mechanisms, but in adulthood, they manifest as challenges that interfere with personal, social, and professional functioning. Childhood trauma also alters the hippocampus, the brain's center for memory and contextual understanding. The hippocampus helps you differentiate between past and present, and it allows you to process experiences accurately and store memories in a healthy, integrated way. When a child experiences trauma, especially chronic or severe trauma, the hippocampus can shrink or function differently, impairing the ability to contextualize events and regulate the stress response. As an adult, this can lead to intrusive memories, flashbacks, or difficulty distinguishing between safe and threatening situations. Your emotional brain becomes locked in patterns that replay old stresses, even when logically you know there is no danger. Memory fragmentation is another consequence. You may remember emotions vividly, but struggle to place them within a coherent narrative of events, leading to confusion, anxiety, and repeated cycles of emotional reactivity that feel uncontrollable. Trauma does not only change the structure of the brain, it changes its chemistry as well. Chronic exposure to stress in childhood affects cortisol levels, the hormone responsible for stress regulation, as well as neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and GABA, which govern mood, pleasure, and inhibition. Dysregulation of these chemical systems can leave adults with a heightened stress response, difficulty experiencing joy, and a tendency toward depressive or anxious states. Your brain becomes wired to anticipate threat and devalue safety, pleasure, and satisfaction, which is why adults with a history of childhood trauma often struggle with relationships, trust, intimacy, and self-esteem. Even when their external environment is supportive, the internal neurochemical patterns remain, creating an invisible barrier to emotional well-being and making it feel as though happiness is elusive or fleeting. Attachment patterns are also profoundly influenced by childhood trauma because the brain's early wiring shapes how you connect to others. Children learn to gauge safety, intimacy, and trust through interactions with primary caregivers. When those interactions are inconsistent, neglectful, or abusive, the brain develops survival-based attachment strategies. This can manifest in adulthood as anxious attachment, where you constantly seek validation and reassurance, or avoidant attachment, where you keep others at a distance to prevent potential harm. You may unconsciously sabotage relationships, struggle with commitment, or feel extreme fear of abandonment, all of which are rooted in neural adaptations formed to survive unpredictable caregiving environments. These patterns are not personal failings. They are brain-based survival strategies that served a purpose in a threatening environment but now interfere with healthy adult functioning. Another area impacted by trauma is emotional regulation, because the brain circuits responsible for modulating feelings are heavily influenced by early experiences. When a child grows up in a chaotic or unsafe environment, the neural pathways for calming down after emotional arousal may fail to develop fully. As an adult, this manifests as difficulty controlling anger, sadness, or fear, often leading to overreactions, irritability, or chronic stress. Even minor provocations can feel overwhelming because your nervous system has been conditioned to operate in a state of high alert, responding disproportionately to cues that resemble past threats. The result is an emotional life that feels unpredictable, exhausting, and sometimes isolating, because others may not understand why your responses appear extreme, or why you struggle to regulate internal states that seem manageable to those without similar experiences. Furthermore, childhood trauma affects the development of resilience and coping mechanisms, which are critical for navigating the challenges of adult life. When stresses are chronic and unmanageable in childhood, the brain's ability to develop adaptive coping strategies is impaired. This can result in maladaptive behaviors in adulthood, such as avoidance, substance use, compulsive behaviors, or difficulty problem-solving under pressure. While these strategies may offer temporary relief or protection, they often reinforce feelings of helplessness, guilt, or shame. The adult brain carries the residue of these survival patterns, making it harder to tolerate uncertainty, disappointment, or emotional discomfort, without reverting to learned coping strategies that may no longer serve a useful purpose. Even sleep, one of the brain's essential restorative processes, is often disrupted by early trauma. The hyperactive amygdala, heightened stress response, and dysregulated neurotransmitter systems can make it difficult to fall asleep, stay asleep, or enter deep, restorative sleep cycles. Poor sleep quality compounds emotional and cognitive difficulties, further amplifying anxiety, irritability, and difficulty concentrating. Your brain, conditioned to be on constant alert, struggles to achieve the restorative processes necessary for emotional integration, memory consolidation, and cognitive flexibility. This creates a vicious cycle where the consequences of childhood trauma continue to shape every waking moment, making adult functioning feel more difficult than it would for someone whose early environment allowed for consistent safety, comfort, and support. Perhaps most importantly, understanding these changes is not about blaming yourself or your caregivers. It is about recognizing that trauma leaves measurable, observable impacts on the adult brain, and that these impacts shape how you think, feel, and behave in ways that are often outside of conscious control. The good news is that the brain is also highly plastic, capable of growth, repair, and reorganization throughout life. Awareness, therapy, supportive relationships, mindfulness, and intentional practices can help rewire neural pathways, regulate stress responses, and restore healthy emotional functioning. The first step is understanding exactly what trauma has done to your adult brain, so that you can recognize the patterns, validate your experiences, and begin the process of healing. As we delve deeper into the lasting effects of childhood trauma on the adult brain, one of the most compelling aspects is how it shapes your perception of safety and threat, fundamentally altering the way you navigate relationships, environments, and even your own thoughts. The amygdala, which functions as the brain's early warning system, remains hyper-responsive long after the original threats have disappeared. And this constant state of alertness can distort your sense of reality, making neutral interactions feel charged or dangerous. In adulthood, this means that ordinary criticism, minor conflicts, or ambiguous social cues can trigger the same intense fear, anxiety, or defensive reactions that once protected you from actual harm as a child. Your brain, having been trained for survival rather than comfort, interprets events through a lens of vigilance, automatically scanning for danger even when none exists. This can lead to social withdrawal, avoidance of intimacy, or overreaction to perceived slights, because the underlying neural circuits are still operating as if you were in a threatening environment, and the consequences are felt in both your emotions and your body. The prefrontal cortex, which is tasked with planning, reasoning, and regulating impulses, is often underdeveloped or dysregulated in adults who experienced early trauma, because chronic stress in childhood interferes with its growth and connectivity. This can result in difficulties with decision-making, emotional control, and long-term planning, leaving you feeling impulsive, indecisive, or overwhelmed by the simplest challenges. The adult brain carries forward these patterns unconsciously, which is why you may find yourself repeatedly making choices that seem counterproductive, reacting emotionally before thinking rationally, or struggling to maintain consistency in habits, goals, or relationships. These challenges are not evidence of personal weakness or failure. They are the natural consequences of a brain that adapted to an environment where survival required rapid, reactive responses rather than reflective, deliberate thinking. Recognizing this allows you to approach yourself with compassion, understanding that your neural wiring is a response to past conditions, not a reflection of your character or potential. In addition, the hippocampus, responsible for memory formation, contextual awareness, and integration of experiences, is profoundly affected by childhood trauma. Trauma can cause the hippocampus to shrink or function differently, making it difficult to distinguish between past trauma and present safety. This neural alteration can explain why adults who endured early trauma often experience intrusive memories, flashbacks, or persistent anxiety when confronted with situations that only vaguely resemble past stresses. It is not that your adult life is objectively dangerous. It is that your brain is reacting as if the past is repeating itself, blurring the lines between then and now. This can make ordinary life feel unpredictable, triggering hypervigilance and emotional distress that seem irrational, but are rooted in adaptive mechanisms designed to protect you as a child. Understanding this distinction is critical because it reframes the emotional intensity you experience as a response generated by a brain that was programmed for survival, not a personal failing or lack of resilience. Trauma also reshapes the brain's reward and motivation systems, particularly those involving dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure, reward, and reinforcement. Chronic stress in childhood can reduce dopamine sensitivity, making it harder to feel satisfaction, joy, or motivation in adulthood, and leaving you prone to seeking external sources of validation or relief. This neurological shift may explain why some adults who experienced early trauma struggle with addictions, compulsive behaviors, or chronic dissatisfaction, because their brains are seeking the chemical signals of reward that were diminished or disrupted during crucial developmental periods. Over time, these patterns become ingrained, shaping habits, relationships, and coping mechanisms, often in ways that perpetuate stress and emotional discomfort. Recognizing this as a neurobiological consequence rather than a moral failing allows for a more compassionate approach to healing and behavioral change. Another profound effect of childhood trauma is its impact on attachment patterns, which are rooted in early interactions with caregivers and determine how you relate to others in adulthood. Insecure attachment styles, whether anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, are common outcomes of inconsistent, neglectful, or abusive caregiving. Anxiously attached adults may constantly seek reassurance, fear abandonment, or overinvest emotionally in relationships, while avoidantly attached adults may struggle with intimacy, suppress emotions, or distance themselves to maintain safety. Disorganized attachment, often the result of chaotic or unpredictable caregiving, can create a confusing blend of approach and avoidance, leaving individuals unsure of how to connect with others safely. These attachment patterns are not conscious choices. They are deeply ingrained neural strategies that helped you cope with early uncertainty, but can interfere with healthy adult relationships. Becoming aware of these patterns allows you to consciously work towards secure attachments, recognizing triggers and building emotional strategies that reflect safety rather than survival. The stress hormone system, particularly the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA axis, is also profoundly influenced by childhood trauma. Chronic early stress can lead to dysregulation of cortisol production, leaving you prone to heightened stress responses, difficulty calming down after emotional arousal, or even exhaustion and burnout when faced with minor challenges. Your brain learns to expect danger constantly, which creates a default state of alertness that may feel automatic and involuntary. This physiological imprint explains why some adults feel anxious or tense without knowing why their bodies may react intensely to ordinary stresses, or why relaxation and emotional regulation can be difficult to achieve. Understanding this mechanism is crucial because it emphasizes that the challenges you face are rooted in biological adaptation, not personal inadequacy, and that interventions like mindfulness, therapy, and regulated breathing can help retrain these stress systems over time. The impact of trauma is also evident in the neural circuits responsible for emotional regulation and executive control, which connect the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala and other subcortical structures. Childhood trauma often weakens these connections, making it difficult for the rational, reasoning part of your brain to moderate the emotional, reactive parts. As an adult, this manifests as impulsive reactions, mood swings, or difficulty tolerating frustration and distress. The brain, having learned that quick emotional responses were necessary for survival, continues to favor reaction over reflection, which can make daily life feel chaotic, overwhelming, or emotionally unpredictable. Recognizing these patterns allows you to begin cultivating strategies that strengthen these connections, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, and deliberate emotional practice, which gradually teach the brain new ways to respond to stress, uncertainty, and interpersonal challenges. In addition to structural and chemical changes, childhood trauma also affects how the brain perceives reward, trust, and social cues. Adults who experience neglect, abuse, or inconsistency in early life may struggle to interpret kindness, predict stability, or rely on others for support, because their brains learned that the social environment is unreliable or threatening. This can manifest as hypervigilance in social situations, difficulty forming close relationships, or persistent skepticism about others' intentions. Your adult brain continues to prioritize caution over openness, protection over vulnerability, and anticipation of harm over expectation of safety. These adaptive strategies, once necessary for survival, can now interfere with healthy social connection, intimacy, and emotional satisfaction. Recognizing these patterns is the first step in retraining the brain to differentiate between past threat and present safety, allowing for more authentic and secure relational experiences. Finally, understanding the pervasive impact of childhood trauma is crucial for breaking generational cycles and reclaiming your own mental health. Trauma is not a mark of weakness. It is a reflection of the adaptive mechanisms your brain developed to survive challenging environments. By learning how these adaptations operate in your adult brain, you gain the ability to intervene, rewire neural patterns, and foster resilience. Therapeutic approaches such as trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, somatic therapy, and supportive relational experiences help recalibrate brain systems that were skewed by early adversity. Awareness of these effects allows you to contextualize past behaviors, validate emotional responses, and cultivate strategies for emotional regulation, healthy relationships, and personal growth. Understanding the neurological consequences of trauma is empowering because it provides both a map of where challenges arise and a roadmap for recovery, offering hope that the brain's plasticity can be harnessed to heal even decades after early adversity. As we move further into the ways childhood trauma shapes the adult brain, one of the most profound and often overlooked consequences is how it affects your ability to regulate emotions in real time, which can manifest as emotional volatility, heightened sensitivity, or difficulty recovering from even minor stressors. Your brain, conditioned to anticipate danger during formative years, often interprets neutral or ambiguous situations as threats, activating the amygdala and stress response systems even when there is no immediate harm. This automatic reactivity can leave you feeling overwhelmed, frustrated, or anxious in social, professional, or intimate settings, and it may lead others to misinterpret your reactions as overblown or irrational. The challenge is not that your emotions are inherently excessive, but that your brain was trained to survive by prioritizing immediate responses to perceived danger, which can now interfere with thoughtful problem-solving, self-expression, and emotional stability. Understanding this mechanism is critical because it reframes emotional intensity as a survival adaptation rather than a personal flaw. And it opens the door to strategies that strengthen emotional regulation and neural resilience. Another significant consequence of childhood trauma is its effect on the brain's reward system, which governs motivation, pleasure, and reinforcement learning. Chronic stress during early development can reduce sensitivity to dopamine, the neurotransmitter that signals reward and pleasure, making it harder to experience joy, satisfaction, or intrinsic motivation as an adult. This neurological shift often leads to seeking external sources of validation, pleasure, or stimulation, which can manifest as compulsive behaviors, overworking, or even addictive tendencies. Your brain, shaped by scarcity, neglect, or inconsistent reinforcement, may have learned that comfort, love, or stability must be earned or chased, creating patterns that can feel frustrating or unending. Recognizing this dynamic is liberating because it reframes these behaviors as understandable neurobiological adaptations, while also pointing toward interventions like mindfulness, positive reinforcement, and healthy habit formation that can recalibrate reward circuits and restore the capacity to feel authentic satisfaction and pleasure in everyday life. Childhood trauma also impacts the brain's prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for executive functions such as decision-making, impulse control, and planning in ways that profoundly affect adult behavior. Chronic stress in early life can limit prefrontal development or weaken its connections with the amygdala and other subcortical structures, leaving you more prone to reactive, impulsive behaviors and less able to reflect before responding. This neurological wiring can manifest as difficulties in managing anger, tolerating frustration, or maintaining long-term goals, which often feels like an internal conflict between your intentions and your automatic reactions. It is not a matter of moral weakness or laziness. It is the natural result of a brain trained to prioritize survival over reason. Understanding this helps cultivate self-compassion, as it allows you to recognize that behaviors rooted in early trauma are adaptive responses, even if they now feel maladaptive in adult contexts, and that with intentional practice, you can strengthen prefrontal regulation to regain self-control and intentionality. Furthermore, trauma in childhood can create deep patterns of distrust and hypervigilance in adult relationships. The brain's early experiences with caregivers teach fundamental lessons about safety, predictability, and reliability. And when those lessons are inconsistent, neglectful, or abusive, neural circuits learn to anticipate betrayal, abandonment, or harm. In adulthood, this can result in difficulty trusting others, fear of vulnerability, and heightened sensitivity to perceived rejection or criticism. You may unconsciously test partners, friends, or colleagues, interpret neutral comments as threats, or struggle to feel secure in relationships, all of which are manifestations of survival strategies encoded in the brain to protect against repetition of early trauma. Awareness of this dynamic is essential because it provides context for relational patterns and opens the possibility of consciously cultivating trust, practicing vulnerability, and building attachments that are secure and healthy rather than reactive or defensive. Another critical consequence of childhood trauma is the impact on memory and cognition, particularly the ability to integrate emotional experiences coherently. The hippocampus, central to memory formation and contextualization, can be structurally and functionally altered by prolonged early stress, leading to fragmented or intrusive recollections. Adults who experience trauma may vividly remember the emotional content of events, but struggle to place them accurately in time or context, creating confusion, distress, or self-blame. These memory distortions can reinforce anxiety, mistrust, and hypervigilance, because the brain repeatedly signals danger even when current circumstances are safe. Understanding this mechanism allows you to approach memories with curiosity rather than judgment, differentiating between the emotional intensity of recall and the actual events, and gradually reclaiming cognitive clarity and emotional integration. The neurological consequences of childhood trauma also extend to self-perception and identity. Early experiences of neglect, criticism, or abuse can teach the brain patterns of self-doubt, shame, and low self-worth, which persist into adulthood as internalized beliefs about inadequacy or unlovability. These beliefs are deeply embedded in neural circuits and often operate below conscious awareness, influencing how you interpret feedback, perceive opportunities, and interact with others. They can make it difficult to pursue goals, advocate for yourself, or experience genuine self-compassion. Importantly, recognizing that these internalized messages are the result of early adaptive survival mechanisms, rather than objective truths about your character or capabilities, is the first step toward reshaping them through conscious reflection, therapy, and positive reinforcement. Childhood trauma also rewires neural circuits related to stress responses, creating long-term patterns of heightened arousal and reactivity. The HPA axis, responsible for regulating cortisol and other stress hormones, becomes dysregulated under chronic early stress, leaving adults more susceptible to anxiety, hypervigilance, and difficulty calming down after emotionally charged events. This dysregulation impacts both mental and physical health, contributing to sleep disturbances, chronic tension, and vulnerability to mood disorders. Your body may feel perpetually on edge, even when your conscious mind knows there is no imminent threat. Understanding that this is a biological consequence of early trauma empowers you to adopt strategies that regulate stress responses, such as meditation, breath work, somatic therapy, or consistent routines that signal safety to your nervous system. Finally, the impact of childhood trauma extends to the development of resilience and coping strategies. While some adults may develop adaptive strengths from early adversity, many struggle with maladaptive coping patterns that perpetuate emotional distress or reinforce survival mechanisms that no longer serve them. These can include avoidance, emotional suppression, people-pleasing, or hyper-independence, all of which reflect early neural conditioning designed to manage unpredictable environments. The brain, shaped by trauma, learns to prioritize immediate safety over long-term well-being, which can create ongoing tension, self-doubt, and difficulty navigating complex adult challenges. Recognizing these patterns as adaptive responses, rather than personal failings, allows for a more compassionate approach to change and provides a foundation for cultivating new neural pathways that support emotional regulation, secure relationships, and authentic self-expression. As we reach the final insights on how childhood trauma shapes the adult brain, it becomes evident that while the neural adaptations developed in response to early adversity were essential for survival, they also create patterns that can limit emotional flexibility, interpersonal connection, and self-realization in adulthood. One of the most profound consequences is the persistent activation of the stress response, which can make everyday challenges feel disproportionately overwhelming and ordinary interactions seem emotionally hazardous. Your brain, conditioned to prioritize survival over comfort, often misinterprets benign stimuli as threats, leading to anxiety, hypervigilance, and emotional reactivity that are difficult to control. This persistent state of arousal not only affects mental health, but also shapes behaviors, decision-making, and relational patterns, reinforcing cycles of tension, withdrawal, or overcompensation that may feel inescapable. Understanding this mechanism reframes these experiences as logical responses to past conditions rather than inherent flaws, allowing for a pathway toward recovery and neural recalibration. Equally significant is the impact on emotional regulation, because childhood trauma affects the integration between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, impairing the brain's ability to modulate emotional responses effectively. Adults who experienced early adversity often find themselves reacting impulsively, struggling to manage anger, fear, or sadness, and experiencing mood fluctuations that feel uncontrollable. These patterns are not a reflection of character, but rather a biological consequence of a brain trained to respond quickly to perceived danger. With awareness, however, it is possible to strengthen these neural connections through deliberate practices such as mindfulness, cognitive behavioral strategies, and trauma-informed therapy, which gradually enhance the capacity for emotional balance, reflective thinking, and thoughtful decision-making. By retraining the brain to respond to present conditions rather than past threats, adults can regain control over emotions that once felt automatic and overwhelming. Childhood trauma also leaves lasting effects on memory and cognitive processing. The hippocampus, responsible for contextualizing experiences and differentiating past from present, is often structurally and functionally altered, leading to fragmented or intrusive memories. This can result in flashbacks, exaggerated emotional reactions to minor triggers, or difficulty learning from past experiences, because the brain interprets situations through the lens of threat rather than information. Adults may feel haunted by memories, struggle to trust their own recollection, or find themselves reliving the emotional intensity of events that occurred decades earlier. Understanding that these patterns are neurobiologically grounded provides both validation and a foundation for interventions, allowing individuals to reconstruct narratives, integrate memories safely, and develop a sense of mastery over experiences that were once overwhelming. Another critical area influenced by early trauma is the development of attachment and relational patterns. Childhood experiences with caregivers shape neural pathways that govern trust, intimacy, and social engagement. And when these experiences were inconsistent, neglectful, or abusive, they can result in insecure or disorganized attachment styles in adulthood. Adults may struggle to form deep, secure connections, oscillate between craving closeness and avoiding vulnerability, or constantly seek validation and reassurance. These relational patterns are not a reflection of moral weakness, but the result of adaptive strategies formed to survive environments that were emotionally unpredictable. Awareness of these tendencies is the first step toward cultivating secure attachments through conscious effort, supportive relationships, and therapeutic interventions that rewire the brain's relational circuits, allowing for greater trust, empathy, and connection. The brain's reward and motivation systems are similarly impacted by early trauma. Chronic stress in childhood can reduce dopamine sensitivity, diminishing the ability to experience pleasure, satisfaction, and intrinsic motivation. This can lead to a lifetime of seeking external validation, compulsive behaviors, or reliance on unhealthy coping mechanisms to stimulate reward pathways. Adults may feel a persistent sense of dissatisfaction, emptiness, or frustration, as if true joy is elusive or fleeting. Recognizing these patterns as neurobiological consequences rather than personal failings opens the door to strategies that restore the capacity for reward and pleasure, such as cultivating meaningful activities, practicing gratitude, and engaging in consistent, positive reinforcement that retrains the brain to associate safety and engagement with positive outcomes. Chronic stress and trauma also affect the regulation of the HPA axis, which governs cortisol production and the body's stress response. Dysregulation of this system can result in heightened reactivity, difficulty recovering from stressful events, and increased vulnerability to physical and mental health challenges. Your nervous system may default to a state of vigilance, making relaxation, calmness, and emotional stability seem difficult to attain. Understanding this biological imprint allows you to implement interventions such as mindful breathing, somatic therapies, physical exercise, and consistent routines that signal safety to the nervous system, gradually normalizing stress responses and allowing the adult brain to operate with greater balance, flexibility, and resilience. The final layer of impact lies in the internalization of beliefs about self-worth, competence, and safety, which often originate from early trauma. These internalized narratives shape how adults perceive themselves, interpret others' actions, and make decisions under stress. You may unconsciously believe that you are unworthy, unlovable, or destined for failure, which limits opportunities for growth, self-expression, and authentic connection. Yet these beliefs are not truths. They are the echoes of survival strategies encoded in the brain during formative years. By consciously identifying and challenging these narratives through therapeutic interventions, positive self-reflection, and supportive relationships, adults can reconstruct their internal sense of worth, cultivate self-compassion, and reclaim agency over thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. The hopeful truth is that the adult brain retains remarkable plasticity, meaning that despite decades of trauma-related adaptation, it can reorganize, repair, and form new pathways that support emotional regulation, cognitive clarity, and secure relational patterns. Through consistent effort, supportive relationships, therapy, and self-directed practices, the brain can relearn safety, develop resilience, and restore balance to stress and reward systems. This means that while childhood trauma leaves lasting marks, it does not determine your future, and the neural circuits shaped by fear and stress can be transformed into circuits that support growth, empowerment, and emotional fulfillment. Ultimately, understanding what childhood trauma does to the adult brain is both sobering and empowering. It explains why you may experience emotional reactivity, trust issues, relational difficulties, or persistent anxiety even in safe environments. And it validates the lived reality of those patterns. Yet it also illuminates a path forward, demonstrating that awareness, intervention, and intentional practice can recalibrate neural systems, reclaim autonomy, and restore emotional and relational health. The adult brain, resilient and plastic, holds the capacity for healing, adaptation, and thriving, even in the wake of early adversity. By recognizing the mechanisms through which trauma influenced development, validating the survival strategies that once protected you, and committing to conscious rewiring and self-care, you can transform the echoes of your past into the foundation for a healthier, more empowered future. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful or eye-opening, make sure to hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe for more practical psychology insights, self-awareness tools, and mind-sharpening advice. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.